So red natural history at first blush names a divide between traditional natural history. I don't know if we have a color for it. Let's just say gray natural history because it seems the most boring. And posited against that form of natural history is instead the variety of movements and organizations, indigenous nations, workers, socialists, communists, and their institutions and their ways of knowing and understanding the world that have been for decades and for centuries beyond them fighting to repair and transform the world such that a flourishing of present and future generations of people and non-human species might exist. We can see or begin to see such a divide among all different kinds of social groups, classes, institutions, certainly within disciplines like geography, but also geology, environmental science, and natural history. And this is important because it helps us see and name who might be with us and who might be against us. So yeah, geography, like a lot of Western modes of knowledge, has a long and intimate history with the imperial project, and one that's very direct in some ways that might be a little bit more indirect in other sorts of disciplines. So for the project of building empires, paramount was the process of knowing lands from a distance, understanding what peoples, resources, and non-human animals populated these lands, and considering how to move those people or resources in accordance with the project of maximizing the profits or value that you could get out of those people or resources, and bring that value back to the imperial core. And so geography, as it emerged as a discipline, was crucial, in particular to the imperial project in North and South America, as well as later in different ways in Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia as well. So obviously this is kind of like a very deeply problematic form of knowledge collection. And yet, as geography transformed into the 20th century, it continued to engage and be used in new forms of imperial exploitation as well. A whole theory in geography emerged that was consistent with the varieties of racial science of the time, which sought to categorize people based on their climate, and from that derive some sort of moral understanding of their character, their value, their intellectual type, and the like, arranging in a hierarchy with, of course, Europeans at the top, and then a variety of other peoples who were shaped by their climate to be better workers than thinkers, or to have certain kinds of feeble personalities in their sort of racist discourse of the time that meant that they were not participants or full participants in civilization, and thus could not govern themselves and needed to be shepherded by imperial powers in some sort of ways. And is only in the wake of the disaster of the Holocaust and World War II, as well as decolonization movements around the world, that these forms of outright racism in geography were able to be challenged, and created a space within the discipline for a more radical reevaluation of how to think about space, place, people, and in particular to put capital and capital accumulation and imperialism onto the map, to sort of take those tools that were originally developed in and for imperial power, and to sort of then remap and re-understand the concentrations of power, wealth, capital, and the like, in order that we might understand how they could or ought to be transformed, fought against, etc. And so this form of radical geography that began in the 1960s and 70s reshaped our discipline in a lot of important ways and created space for not just challenges to imperialism and capital accumulation, but also a kind of cross-pollination between feminist, queer, anti-racist, and other forms of spatial knowledge. And yet at the same time, like many disciplinary knowledges, we are and continue to be shaped by our history. And this has created sometimes a kind of excessive self-criticism in which it almost seems as if geographic knowledge cannot ever be but an inheritor of its imperial history. And I guess for me, I'm trying to understand instead how we can see the discipline of geography as always having been split by, on the one hand, these imperial projects, but on the other hand, histories of radical understandings of space and place, and how those understandings might help us challenge the sort of imperial mode of geography. And so what Red Natural History does and ought to do is begin to put on the map our history of struggle and even some of our wins, even some of the places in which, even for a temporary period of time, anti-colonial movements, indigenous movements for sovereignty, movements against large infrastructure projects of various different kinds were able to seize and build and grow power rather than simply roll over and feel miserable about being smaller than our opponents or something like that. So by contrast to these other positions, then, Red Natural History investigations ought to invigorate us by showing the degree of organization and commitment that our ancestors have had in fighting against slavery, exploitation, and colonization. And this can include some ancestors within academic disciplines and within universities even, but also many other kinds of investigations well beyond and against these institutions as well. And these kinds of selected ancestors didn't give up when things were bad, when the odds were stacked against them or getting worse. They didn't wallow in their sort of in feeling like change was impossible or something like that. So if they didn't, why would we sort of continually to just feel fear, anxious, or fear, anxiety, or misery, or the like? In sort of resurrecting and seeing in their struggles continuations of what we're struggling for and against, the point is to begin to resuscitate the kinds of courage, will, organizational structures, and maybe even something like humor that we can be inheritors of, alongside the kinds of knowledge that has been accumulated in these long-term struggles and passed down to us.